Welcome everyone to Privacy's webinar GDPR Phase 2 from Boxticking to Accountability with Simon Hall. Simon is a privacy and GDPR expert who was IBM's first data privacy officer for UK and Ireland. Welcome Simon, it's an honor to have you.
Thank you very much, Lisa, and thank you all everyone for taking time to join this lunchtime webinar. Thanks also to Privatech for sponsoring and arranging it. Most of you will know that in May this year, the ICO published a report called GDPR 1 Year On, and hopefully quite a few of you will have read the blog that the Information Commissioner Elizabeth Denham posted to launch it. Perhaps surprisingly, it was the blog and not the report that sent the clearest messages to organizations. So I want to start with a couple of quotations from that blog. Then we'll work out what they mean in practice for DPOs and other privacy advisors. And also for the organizations we advise. So you should now be seeing a copy of that blog on your screen. I would urge you to, if you haven't read it before, I really would urge you to read it. If we get some time at the end, I'll talk a bit more about it. For those of you who just dialed in, I'm going to read them out anyway. So here we go. First one. With the initial hard work of preparing for, sorry, can I just stop? We've got some background noise. Can we go on mute, please? Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. With the initial hard work of preparing for and implementing the GDPR behind us, there are ongoing challenges of operationalizing and normalizing the new regime. And then the second one is, the focus for the second year of the GDPR must be beyond baseline compliance. Organizations need to shift their focus to accountability. Strong accountability frameworks are the backbone of formalizing the move of our profession away from box ticking. Just to be clear, when I'm talking about us, I mean you and me, assuming that we're DPOs or we're privacy advisors of some sort. And when I talk about our organizations, I mean the ones who are doing the processing, the organizations who employ or engage us to advise and monitor their processing activities, okay? So there are two clear messages here for our organizations. And these are messages we really need to pass on to our leadership in our organizations, because that's who they're addressed to. And when you get more time to look at the blog, you'll see what I mean. So two messages that we're getting here. Firstly, the ICO is telling us what it thinks of our efforts so far. And secondly, it's telling us what we need to change going forward. So the ICO is starting by acknowledging that on the whole, organizations have invested a lot of time and money in GDPR programs, and the ICO kind of understands that embedding all this stuff into our businesses is challenging. They know it takes time, and that's great. It's good to know we've got a regulator who understands the real world and the challenges that organizations face with GDPR. But that's not all the Commissioner is saying about our efforts to date. She describes the overall achievement of the first year post-GDPR as baseline compliance. Baseline compliance, that's what she's saying we've achieved. And she says we need to shift our focus beyond compliance and away from box ticking. Now, I don't know about you, but to me, that sounds a bit harsh. So why do we think the Commissioner would say that? Well, some of you who've been around long enough will remember that back in 2010, there were two principal reasons why it was decided that the data protection laws, the Data Protection Directive, the laws across the EU needed a major overhaul. The first will come as no surprise. Volumes of big data were exploding and technology was advancing and accelerating at a crazy, unprecedented rate. The second was not so widely known, but was equally crucial in replacing the 1995 Data Protection Directive. And that's this. Compliance had become a box-ticking exercise. Do we have a privacy policy? Tick. Security policy? Tick. DSARs completed within a month? Tick. Consent? Tick. Sorry, no pun intended. The new buzzword in 2010 was accountability. Privacy wasn't working. Data protection laws weren't working. So it was accountability. That was where it was going. Now, the first time I heard this was at a privacy conference in London that year. And forgive me for name dropping, but I was I was having a conversation with two people, Robert Bond, who's a solicitor a lot of you will probably know, with Bristow's in London, and the other was Richard Thomas, who had been the Information Commissioner until the previous year, until 2009. And Richard was saying that the direction of travel in EU data protection law was towards accountability. Now, I like to think I'm reasonably intelligent. Some of you might disagree. And by that time, I'd been DPO for IBM and Ireland for over 3 years, but I hadn't a clue what he was talking about. I didn't understand it. Obviously, I understood what the word meant. I know what accountability, I can open a dictionary. I'm not going to be surprised when I read the definition, and you'll all be the same. But it took me 3 full years to work out how this new accountability principle would actually affect organizations in practice, what it would mean for them. So just going back to the Information Commissioner's blog then for a minute. The Commissioner is saying that after a year of GDPR, in spite of accountability being one of its founding principles and one of its main reasons for existence, organizations are still focused on baseline compliance and ticking boxes. And you know what? She's right. I'll give you 2 examples. Firstly, how often do you still hear people asking, are we GDPR compliant, or when will we be GDPR compliant? Just executives, stakeholders, even some DPOs are still using these questions, putting these questions. What is GDPR compliance? And how have we achieved it yet? The second is the number of medium and large organizations that are still using spreadsheets to comply with Article 30, record of processing. I wonder how many of those there are. The thing is, data protection isn't like most other laws. Most laws basically require something or prohibit something. They tell you what you must do, they tell you what you mustn't do. Data protection isn't like that. Data protection is an ethical code. It's a set of principles that have been given legal status, and they're supported by a series of regulatory requirements. They're kind of guidance, but it's legally binding. So all this stuff around it. So if you like GDPR, strip away everything else, just leave Article 5. That's the privacy principles and the accountability principle. And that is what GDPR is all about. And all the rest of it is guidance, but it's legally binding. Now, let me give you an example. If we sit down and really think about what we would need, just with Article 5 in front of us, just picture Article 5, those 6 principles, what we would need in order to ensure compliance with even just the first principle, the one that says that all processing must be lawful, fair, and transparent. So what would we need to ensure compliance with that principle? It soon becomes obvious that we need to know exactly what personal information is coming into our organization, where it's coming from, who's providing it, is it legal for us to even receive it? When it comes in, where's it coming into our organization? How's it coming in? Who's using it? Who's got access to it? What's happening to it? Where's it going? And then when it leaves our organization, if third parties have got access to it, what are they doing with it? And then at the end of life, what happens when we no longer need it? Or if we pass it on to some third party and it's not coming back? That's the kind of visibility we need, because unless we can see all those data flows and all those processing activities and operations, unless we can see that, visualize it, then how on earth can we check that every bit of it is lawful, that every bit of it is fair, and that we're being transparent about every bit of it? See what I mean? So in short, we need end-to-end visibility of the entire life cycle for all the data we hold. That's what we would need, and that's just to comply with the first principle. Of course, if we have that, then complying with the other principles is not a problem either. And just to be clear, in this situation, when I say we, I don't mean us as DPOs and advisors. I mean the organizations that we advise and monitor, because, of course, it's their responsibility to ensure compliance with the privacy principles, not the DPOs. It's not the DPO's job to ensure compliance. It's the controller or the processor. It's their job. And we, as advisors, as DPOs, we're just there to monitor and advise. The leadership, they're the people who are going to be held to account when something goes wrong. So leadership needs the business to have total visibility of the data lifecycle. Leadership needs the advisors, the DPOs, to have total visibility of that lifecycle, because then leadership can know and can have assurance and confidence that the business, the management, and and the DPO and other advisors have got a handle on. They can see what's going on. They can identify the risks. They can put the appropriate controls in place, and they can monitor and they can make sure they can ensure that all those activities, all that collection and use and sharing and storage and disposal, that all of that is compliant with the privacy principles. Okay, so now we've already hit a disconnect, because Article 30 of the GDPR says organizations have to keep a record of processing activities, and it even specifies what details that record has to include. So a spreadsheet is the obvious solution to meet that requirement, because you just have one row for each processing activity, one column for each required detail, and that's presumably why so many organizations used Excel to create their record of processing, or ROPers, as everyone seems to be calling them these days. But can a spreadsheet give management and DPOs the sort of visibility we've just decided we need? Can a spreadsheet, however detailed, help management and the DPO to monitor those processing activities, all that collection, all that access, all that use, all that sharing, all that retention and disposal? Can that spreadsheet help management and the DPO to monitor all of that to ensure that it's all lawful and fair and transparent? I could argue that by being so prescriptive about specific controls like the ROPA, the GDPR has actually encouraged organizations to focus on compliance with specific articles, to focus on baseline compliance and to adopt a box-ticking approach. So in this context, maybe it's not so surprising that the Information Commissioner is now saying that we all need to change our approach, move away from baseline compliance, move away from box-ticking, shift our focus to accountability. And I believe this is the underlying cause of one of the biggest challenges that we as advisors and our organizations face now around privacy. Based on what the Information Commissioner has said, we are now going to have to go back to our executive committees and our clients and tell them that, okay, we're compliant with Article 30, but the spreadsheet approach is not a sustainable solution. We're going to have to tell them that when the ICO investigates a breach or a complaint now, it'll be all about Article 5.2. It'll all be about accountability. That the ICO will expect us to demonstrate how we ensure compliance with the privacy principles. And we're going to have to explain to our leadership that mere compliance with Articles 1 to 99 is no longer enough. And our excos and clients, with some justification, they're going to turn around and say, well, why have we spent all that time and money on a spreadsheet, on all these manual processes and stuff? So let me suggest an answer. When it was decided to base the GDPR on the accountability principle, you remember I was talking about 2010, there were no tools and technologies available, didn't exist, that would give organizations the level of visibility of their data and processing activities that we're talking about. The level needed to demonstrate how they ensure compliance with the privacy principles, that kind of capability simply didn't exist. And when they did start to exist, and this might surprise you, because they genuinely, apart from one or two in the States, which was a completely different matter, where privacy was a completely different thing, but privacy management tools did not start to appear on the market here until about 2016, 2017. And like pretty much all new technologies, initially they were clunky and expensive. And that's only 3 years ago. However, there are now several providers of privacy management software, privacy as a service platforms. They're way better, they're more affordable than they were even a year ago, and they're improving all the time. These tools can give organizations the visibility they need, not only for the records of processing, but also for doing PIAs and DPIAs, for managing DSARs, for reporting and responding to incidents and breaches. And because they're automated tools, they log and timestamp everything. So they form both the foundation and the superstructure of a really robust accountability framework. You remember, we heard the Information Commissioner telling us we need to move towards an accountability framework. So perhaps this is why it's only now, or 6 months ago to be more accurate, that the Information Commissioner has called on organizations to shift their focus from baseline compliance to accountability. A couple of years ago, the tools were really not available, and for most organizations, they just didn't have access to them. So maybe that's why it's only now that the Commissioner is telling us that we've got to shift from compliance to accountability, and to recommend that strong, and I'm quoting again, strong accountability frameworks are the backbone of formalizing the move of our profession away from box ticking. Okay, so what does an accountability framework look like? Because if we've never seen one before, how will we recognize it? How will we design it? It's a challenge. So how about this? You walk into your local supermarket. Just imagine you walk into a supermarket and you pick an item off the shelf, let's say a yogurt pot. Within a nanosecond of the guy at the checkout scanning that yogurt pot, the store manager and a whole bunch of people at head office will have a record of a yogurt pot being sold. But not just any old yogurt pot. They can see which actual yogurt pot was sold. Okay, maybe which batch, but it'll be a small batch. Which store it was sold in, and increasing in a lot of cases, they'll even know it was you that bought it. And if it came to it, if they needed to for any reason, they could very likely produce CCTV of you putting it in your basket, CCTV footage of you paying for it, and further CCTV footage of you putting it in the boot of your car. Now, imagine you fall ill after eating that yogurt and you complain to the supermarket. That supermarket will be able to trace the product back, not only to the factory where the yogurt was made and put into pots, but further back to the herd of cows that produced the milk, the type and source of the bacteria used, the temperature it was fermented at, the manufacturers of the plastic pot, the manufacturer of the foil lid. In short, all the information necessary to investigate and work out how this product could possibly have harmed you. And if necessary, as would generally be the case, to locate all the other yogurt pots in that batch that may be similarly affected. And it can trace that yogurt pot from the producer to the point of delivery at the supermarket's depot, through internal distribution to its stores, where it goes into the warehouse at the back, and then it goes on to put onto the shelf by the shelf stacker, until finally you picked it up, put it in your basket, checked it out, and paid. And that's where they lose sight of it, unless you bring it back in return. In short, retailers, management has visibility of the entire life cycle. So the store manager can see those that product all the way through, and head office can see that product all the way through. So why do supermarkets need this level of visibility? Because it can't be cheap, can it? There are several reasons, but the most relevant to us is that whenever a customer is harmed by something bought from a supermarket, the supermarket is accountable. When a food poisoning or allergic reaction or any other type of harm is reported to a supermarket, it has to notify the regulator, and it'll have to demonstrate how it ensures compliance with food safety and hygiene standards. It'll have to know all that supply information supply chain info we've just been talking about. It'll have to show that it did due diligence before choosing that supplier. It'll have to show that it monitors and audits the supplier. It'll have to show that it identified that particular risk in question, and that it put adequate safeguards in place to protect you from that harm. And it's also going to have to justify why it believed those safeguards were adequate, in inverted commas, and why it didn't implement further controls. So it's not just a question of these are my controls. If you have, they need to document why they haven't, that they've considered further controls, but decided not to, and so documented the rationale. The regulator will also want to know how the supermarket was notified of the incident, how quickly it responded, what action it took to contain the risk, what action it took to reduce the impact, what action it's taken or will take to reduce the likelihood of recurrence. And of course, you will also want to know a lot of that. After all, they sold you a yogurt that made you ill, so you're going to hold that supermarket to account, you're going to hold them accountable, and you're going to demand answers to your questions. So how do retailers achieve this level of visibility? They've got management and BI systems for supply chain, for purchasing, for logistics, for sales, for procurement, for returns of stuff. In fact, for every part of the business, to give them the visibility they need across their operations, the visibility of all the products, everything that comes into their organization, where it comes from, its past history, every movement within its organization and where it goes. Now, obviously, there was a time when all of this was done on paper logs and ledgers, but that was when supermarkets had hundreds of product lines, not tens of thousands. They obviously reached a stage where they had to automate because simply keeping manual records didn't meet the needs anymore, didn't meet the requirements, didn't enable them to be accountable. So can you see the parallels of privacy already in data protection? It doesn't matter what our organization does, whether we're in the public or private or third sector. If we are a medium or large enterprise, or even if we're a small enterprise that processes a lot of personal information, we know that our leadership is going to be held accountable for anything that goes wrong across the entirety of our processing operations, and involving any of our employees or customers or patients or residents or citizens or whoever they are. So given all of that, and after hearing what the Information Commissioner has said so clearly, why would any organization not insist on having the same level of visibility of personal data flowing through its organization as retailers have of products flowing through theirs? Why would any organization not automate its data mapping and inventory of processing activities and other privacy processes and controls? Because I think the Information Commissioner has sent a really clear message. I believe that if, in the course of an audit or investigation, I was to show the ICO my spreadsheet roper, a copy of my processing agreement T's and C's, and half a dozen PDF DPIAs, they will not be ticking boxes on their questionnaire to certify that I have complied with Articles 28, 30, and 35. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, I think I've kind of covered everything. I've probably blitzed you all into submission. If there are any questions, please fire away. Otherwise, I'll tell you a bit more about this blog. I don't see any questions coming through, so let me just tell you a little bit more about this blog. If you haven't read it, and if you're a DPO or if you're an advisor to an organization, I really urge you to read it. You'll find it on the ICO's website. It was dated 30th of May. The thing about it is, when you get a chance to look at it, you'll see that it basically it does explain. If you take these messages to your leadership, for example, if you're having problems trying to explain to them that what we've done so far is great as far as it goes, but it's only part of the journey. We've got to move on to accountability now. This explains it, and also it's given you the, hopefully I've given you the rationale behind why it had to be done this way. There really was no choice. Of course, organizations use spreadsheets for recording their processing back in 2015, 16, 17. Of course they did, because there was no alternative. Now there are alternatives. Now there are better ways, and now there are ways to enable leadership to be comfortable in their accountability. So the thing is, if I'm going to be held accountable for something, I want to know that I have control over the entirety of the area for which I'm accountable. Because if I don't, then someone's going to be asking me questions that I can't answer. Somebody's going to be punishing me for failing to do something that I didn't even know I had to do. So if I was the leader of any organization, I would want to make sure that my management had total understanding and visibility of everything they were doing, and that my DPOs and auditors and advisors were monitoring to make sure that all that was working, because then I can sleep. Then I can sleep at night. Okay, so I really do urge you to look at that. So I guess that's me. We've hit 1:25 UK time, so I can give 5 minutes back. And thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Simon, for this very interesting webinar. I really think you covered everything. And yeah, thank you everyone for attending.